Good morning. How are you guys doing? 8 o'clock. Who was here for a 7 o'clock session? Oh, dedicated. Well, welcome to Hiring and Developing Compliance Leaders. I'm Dan O'Connor. I head up a group called Next Level Compliance, which is part of a company called Next Level Solutions. We only focus on life sciences at Next Level Solutions. My group is specifically responsible for compliance training. That's all we do. So we're specialists in life science compliance training, most of that being in pharma. Really happy to be joined today by three great panelists. We've had a really good time, good discussion putting this together for you. And I'll have them each introduce themselves. First, Jill Daly, VP and Chief Compliance Officer of Insight Corporation.
Hello.
Okay.
Is there anything else
I
to
took
say?
it away, didn't I? Okay. Okay. Well, we'll just go down the table then. I won't even say his name, but...
Jeff Kowalik.
Okay.
Right now, I'm currently with a company called Zambone. It's an Italian pharmaceutical company that has a drug in phase 3 clinical trials that's making its way to the U.S. But I've been in the pharmaceutical industry for around 25 years now. And this is my 22nd, 23rd PCF conference. And I've been in pharma the whole time, compliance.
Right.
Hey, good morning. I'm Jake DeBover, Chief Compliance Officer at Dermavant Sciences. We're a dermatology company with our first commercial launch was in 2022. So we're about a year and a half into a launch. We built a company from scratch. So that's me.
Yeah. All right. Anything you want to add, Jill?
Well, now that everyone's added a little context, my name's Jill Daly. I'm at Insight. I'm Chief Compliance Officer there. We have a team of about 15. I also have been in the pharmaceutical industry my entire career in either legal or compliance roles. So happy to be here today talking about this topic.
So you see, we've got a good cross-section of people here. And one thing they all have in common, and I know this from kind of having talked to them in the past, is they're all passionate about developing kind of compliance leaders, if you will, kind of the next generation of compliance. So this session is really focused on those who are responsible for developing others, as well as those who are here to try and get insight, no pun intended, on, okay, what do chief compliance officers look for, think about when it comes to developing people? So quick show of hands. How many people here are here because you want to develop yourself? Just quick show of hands. Okay. How many here are here because you want to develop others? And how many want to do both of those things? So the middle of that Venn diagram. Okay. How many want to do none of those things? Okay. All right. Well, that's good. Okay, so there's two parts of what we're going to focus on today. It's going to be a jam-packed session like most of these 50-minute sessions are. Two sides to this coin. One of those is some ideas about hiring, starting with talking about, well, what competencies are we looking for when it comes to compliance professionals, future compliance leaders, and then what are some of the best practices that this panel has used to select people? Which is a fancier way of saying kind of hire them, putting them through the hiring process. Secondly, we'll get some ideas about how to develop people. So we'll talk a bit about competencies, and then competencies as they relate to different career stages that people go through in compliance. We'll talk about some best practices for development. And then, if we have time, and it's a really big if, we'll do a case study. And even if we don't get to that case study, I can hand them out to you because you're going to be really excited when you see it. Okay, so we're going to start with kind of defining compliance competencies. So first, let me ask out here, get some input from you. What is a competency at its simplest form? Let's throw some ideas out. Skill. A skill? Aptitude. An aptitude, yeah? Okay, well, we're kind of in the ballpark there. I know that you know what it is, but we'll kind of assign a definition to it, right? So competencies are skills, behaviors, attributes. Aptitudes is another way to think about that. It's the knowledge that people have. And so we're going to try and focus in on what competencies does a compliance professional need. So we're going to start here with that question. So what competencies are needed to be a successful compliance professional? So we're going to start with Jake here and hear what Jake has to say.
When I think about, I've built teams, I've had people where I've inherited, and you're always trying to figure out what's going to be the skills you need for that particular role, right? And I think it's really important that you're thinking about, look, is this the only hire I'm going to get in the next 18 months? Or do I need someone very specific for my job, right? And so I think that's your starting point. I think there has to be a lot of thought. I mean, look, to me, whether you're developing or hiring, it's a lot of work on your part if you want to get it right. Because I think at the end of the day, bringing someone on or keeping someone on who's not right costs you time, money, heartache, emotion, stress, anxiety, all of it, right? And I think in our world too, you can't miss, because I think there's two things. You may not get another chance for a while. You are always building your reputation and credibility within your organization. And when you bring someone on, they are representing you now, right? And if you've done a good job building your reputation within an organization, and then you bring someone on and they kind of aren't where you need them to be, then you're working backwards now, right? And so I think you start with, what do I need? And I look at this sometimes and say, I'm looking half the time on intangible skills, unless it's a technical job, right? Where I say, I need someone to come in and they're going to do Sunshine Act reporting all day, every day. Then they need to have really good, hard set of skills on that topic. But if it's someone coming in who might be more of a generalist or dabble in a few areas, my focus is on intangible skills first and foremost. Because I think for all of us, did anyone go to school and get a degree in compliance? We've all learned compliance at some point in our career. It can be learned, right, if you have the right teachers. But for me, I can't teach people to be comfortable having hard conversations, to be able to manage a lot of things at once, to be able to deal with some of the pressures that we deal with inherently every day. So for me, I'm actually going to start looking at intangible skills as the differentiator for me, because I think, look, if you come in, I can teach you about anti-kickback or fair market value or speaker programs or whatever the topic du jour is, I can teach that. But for me, I'm starting with intangibles.
Right. So Jill and Jeff, I know that you agree with Jake, but there's some other things as well that you might look for, kind of depending on where somebody is and what hire. So what do you guys have to say about that?
Well, I think
Take that.
I think a compliance hire is a little bit different than some other hires, because I think the compliance as an occupation is just a little bit different. And I think from a compliance perspective, one of the things that I would look at is looking for someone who can be nimble and agile, because compliance is different than other organizations. It's not the kind of job, in my opinion and from my experience, that if I had a list of 10 things that I need to get done today, I know I'm lucky if one or two of them get done. There's going to be a fire drill, and things are going to have to be reprioritized. You're going to have to be nimble and readjust, and that's not everybody. So I think as a compliance professional, that's important. I also think someone with the ability to listen, right? Even though you can take the most savvy, the best and the brightest of a compliance professional, but if they're going to be a business partner or they're going to represent compliance on the outside, I think you need someone who's able to listen. And then also, I would say verbal and written communication skills. And then also, lastly, the ability to wear multiple hats. Because in compliance, I don't think anyone has one job. Someone that has the ability to wear multiple hats also, I think, is important.
Yeah, and I think I would just, you guys stole all of my top 10 list, but, I think that flexibility piece is so important. On my team, we joke every year that we go through all this effort at the end of the year to create a compliance plan for next year, and inevitably by February, it is blown up, right? There's something new, there are new DOJ guidelines, the business has shifted. So I do think that adaptability is so important, because you can't have folks on your team who get too rooted in, but I was going to do this and I need to stay this course. It can be frustrating too, right? To have to flex and steer away from what you were doing otherwise. So I think that's really key. I think the other things for me are this ability to be solution-oriented. And we heard yesterday from the Medtronic CEO that since he's become CEO, he gets a lot of bad news. And we know that as compliance professionals, we sometimes receive a lot of bad news and we have to deliver bad news. And I think there's a difference between going to a business partner or even going to someone higher up in your compliance organization and saying, ugh, here's an issue I spotted, or here's a problem, and accompanying that with, and by the way, here are some ideas for how to solve it. So I think that's a really important skill, and just kind of generating that mindset of, I've identified a problem and I'm going to start thinking about a solution as well, is really important. And the last thing I would say is, and I stress this with everyone that we interview, and again, I think to Jake's point, a lot of our compliance teams are fairly lean. We know that we're going to remain fairly lean, and so it's really important that we work as a team. And I think it kind of goes along with these concepts like Jeff mentioned of being flexible, being able to wear multiple hats, but also working really well together. I love the idea of assigning specific responsibilities to individuals in compliance and giving them the autonomy to work in those areas, but at the end of the day, we have to shift, we have to help each other out, we have to take on certain activities, and if the team isn't working together, and if it's not a cohesive group that is willing to help each other, it can be really dysfunctional and problematic.
Thank you. So one thing I didn't mention, and don't judge me for this, is prior to getting involved in the compliance space in 2009, I was kind of a lifelong learning and development training kind of geek, if you will. So I've been for a long time kind of thinking about competencies and trying to think about, and we work with the team on this, how do we kind of organize those? Just kind of a rudimentary model of what might be required. And there's kind of really three levels, if you will, that you can think about when it comes to compliance competencies, kind of grouping those distinct competencies. One of those is foundational, one of those is focused, and one of those is functional. The third one is focused. So the 3 F's, easy enough to remember, right? First, foundational. These are a lot of the things that Jake was touching on, right? Those things, kind of the basics, some of the intangible skills that people need, the innate abilities, the aptitudes, if you will, that people need. Secondly, those things that are related more to general compliance duties. And then thirdly, those specialist type of skills that are more focused. So, here are some of those. This is just a model we put together for reference in this session to maybe give you something to take away with some ideas. We do have...
What I was going to say too is, I don't think you get all 3 of these things. Honestly, I think you may find that really senior person who has all 3, checks all 3 columns. But I think when you go into your search, if you're looking for a new add to your team, right, the basis of the role you're trying to bring in should dictate which column are you going to focus on most, right? Like we want them all, and you're gonna have to make some sacrifices. But it's trying to identify what's most important based upon the role you have. And again, that's why I love the foundational, again, unless it's a really technical role. But if you're bringing in an all-purpose, kind of role, a business unit person who's going to be touching upon, the kind of the core operational things between medical, sales, marketing, et cetera, you want them to have the functional kind of reference points. I think the foundational ones are really critical. And we talked about all those intangible qualities across the panel here. It comes back to that emotional intelligence part too, which is an overused term these days, but if you communicate with the VP of sales and all right, I got something else, and you don't have what's called like that heart, mind, and soul with the way that you engage them with what we call bad news, it's how you deliver it. I actually, when I text our VP of sales and say, hey, you have a few minutes, I will say nothing bad, right? Because I know, I'm the deliverer, I'm like the Grim Reaper sometimes, and I don't want to be that guy. So I don't want anyone to say, oh, I don't want to talk to Jake again, because it's just another bad thing he's bringing me, right? So I think it's having that self-awareness, and you want your people to mimic that, honestly, because you're going to want to be able to push them out there into your organization on your behalf and do the same thing.
I think to that point too, if you kind of look at this last category, which are the more technical skills, I've seen compliance professionals throughout the years just really flex. And so I think all of us having the confidence that if you know how to do policies, then, you could probably figure some of this other stuff out. You can, Jake, to your point, you can learn it. Having the confidence in yourself that you can do that and in your team members too, I think is important to know, because I think these are all transferable. Obviously, there are some specific skills to your point, transparency. We're starting to see monitoring really become a little bit more technical with data scientists and other experts like that in this space. But for the most part, I think we can all handle most of these things, and we'll talk a little bit about giving folks opportunities to try things out and developing.
Yeah. And so you're not, I see you all furiously writing this genius stuff down. You don't have to. This was Jill's suggestion, can we have a handout for it? So if you just kind of want some ideas to take away with you, we do have a handout for that we can give you afterwards. So we'll transition now. So the key thing is, first understanding, okay, if I'm going to be hiring somebody, what am I looking for? And then the second part of it is, okay, well then, how do I find them? How do I kind of source them, find them? What are some of the best practices for doing that? So we're going to kind of start with Jeff here. And Jeff, and it is a little bit like finding a needle in a haystack, right? Because the compliance professional is a very unique, profession. So we're going to start with Jeff, and Jeff, kind of give some comments on, what you've done to find people.
Yeah, I think it's important. Most importantly, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So I've had to build compliance teams at multiple companies, and the experience is entirely different. So these are some things that are adaptable, but it's not really a recipe for hiring. But some of the things that I've found successful are really understanding what is the role, who are you hiring. I mean, you can bifurcate the role of compliance into operations and business partnerships. And those are very different characteristics that you're looking for in folks. I think the other piece to it is when we hire for compliance, you're not just hiring for the compliance department. If they're going to be a business partner or represent compliance, you have to understand who are the stakeholders that this individual is going to be working with. You might include some of those stakeholders in the interviews in identifying the person and making sure, like, when you interview them, you're asking questions or looking at them from the lens of those people that they'll be supporting. Because I think, we work so hard to build the reputation within compliance, right? To break down those walls, to make people feel comfortable to come to us, to raise sensitive issues and topics. And the last thing you really want is someone who's an expert, knows everything about compliance, but doesn't have the acumen or the appropriate approach that can damage that reputation, the overall compliance reputation. I also think it's, you need to look at not just the culture of the company. I'd love to say that, companies all have cultures, but I think departments have cultures too. And sometimes they're consistent with the company culture, and sometimes they're not. But I think when hiring a team or looking for a compliance professional, I always look for someone that both can complement the team and supplement the team, right? Jill's point earlier about how compliance is so lean. If someone goes away or wins the lottery or is out for a month or two, who's going to backfill them, right? Coming back to that point of looking for someone who's sort of nimble, who's sort of, and then I also think staying open-minded. We think we know what we're looking to hire. We think we know what we want. We've all been in compliance. We think we know the role. But there are people out there that are smarter than us, that have different experiences than us, that will bring new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things. So I think being open-minded. I mean, there have been times where I write the job description, and I think I know what I want. But I think Steve Jobs once had a quote that I really like. It's one of the worst things that you can do is bring in a smart person, an experienced person, and tell them what to do. You bring in a smart person and let them tell us what to do to really take it to the next level. So I think being open-minded is really important with the hire too. Reference checks are important. The other thing, at least for me, that's really worked as well, the more detail that you put in the job description, the more focused resumes you're going to get from your HR department or your HR partner working with you. Because you have people that are looking for jobs that say, oh, I can do that. I can do that. Compliance is going to, the HR is going to come with a stack of resumes where maybe one of them might be appropriate. But I think the more that you can educate the HR professional on what you're looking for, what the job is, and the more detail, you'll be able to kind of weed out what comes in. those are just things that have worked for me.
Yeah, look, there's 3 columns here I think we have on the next slide, maybe, Dan, right? And so when we talk about the sourcing, one of the things, we're all here at this meeting, and beyond anything else, it's a great networking opportunity. And I'm a believer, again, in our roles, because I think there's such a high bar for us within an organization and how we operate that, like, again, you can't miss. Like, that's my thing. Like, you can't miss on your hires. And so you getting someone who's spoken for, right, who comes with a referral from someone you trust and know, I think is optimal for what we're doing, right? To me, the last resort is literally hiring someone blind who comes out of a stack, who you've never met, who you know, no one you know knows this person. To me, with what we need, it's a huge risk, right? So I think mining your networks is critically important, to always have people, 6 people you can even go, hey, I'm looking for someone like this. And the beauty of where we are today is, you know, it may not have to be co-located with where you are. So you have a much broader span to pull someone into your organization. I think that's important. I think also internally, I've had people in non-compliance roles, in commercial roles, say, hey, someday I might like to get into compliance, right? And I think that's a good thing if they're the right person and they could toggle to your part of the organization and still feel comfortable doing an excellent job having been on the other side of the business, right? I think that can be really good sometimes. And you talked about the interview process a little bit. I mean, the job description is important. I also think trying to look at a resume and really extrapolate what's real, what's puffery, I think that is a lost art when you sit with someone, be it in person or on a virtual call. Because look, all of our resumes are awesome, right? Like, they're awesome on paper. Let's just be clear. Mine's great. Like, I mean, and I think all of yours are too. But it's trying to figure out, give me some more meat on the bone. You say you've done this. Well, let's talk through that. Because you're trying to pull out the skills or intangible skills that you need from someone in the course of your job. So it's talk about when you confronted this, how you handled a difficult conversation up in the organization, down, across, whatever it might be. But it's really forcing people to bring their resume to life. I mean, I honestly give very little credence to the resume. I see it. I want to make sure it has a few things there, that there's not typos and mistakes, right? I'll rule it out. But the resume is not going to rue the day for me. It's going to be the interview process. And getting them with other parts of the organization, I think, is really important, outside of your team. I think you have a couple people within your org, and then go out, people they may work with, because not only do you get a second set of eyes, and I'm not going to let the marketing person dictate who I hire, but if they're bought in, and then that person starts, now they've already had a conversation with someone, you've already built a little bit of a bridge there too. So I think that helps from how they come on board. So I'll pause and let Jill go.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I mean, I think these are all great. It's all great advice. I think the one thing that occurred to me is in the interview process, when I sort of pressure test how have you handled a difficult situation, I often hear, I have great relationships with my business partners, and across the board, you know, as you interview candidates, and that's just one example of where I like to try to pressure test and say, okay, you know, whether you have good relationships or not, and let's face it, we don't all have great relationships with every business stakeholder that we work with. The more important thing is, do you have the skills to influence? Do you have the ability to be able to work through difficult issues? And what does that look like? How do you overcome when you don't have a great relationship with someone, or when you are handling a difficult issue? So I think just going through some of these scenarios and not taking things at face value, and you know, whether it's the representations on the resume, or whether it's, oh, you know, don't worry, I've got this, and kind of drilling down and asking for examples of how folks actually operate in practice. Amy, do you have a?
I like that, Dylan. I always, when someone gives a really good example, I always say, well, can you give me another example when it didn't go
Yeah.
well, and how that went, and how did you handle it? And
Yeah.
it's like always, you know, I appreciate it when somebody is willing to also be humble and tell me something versus, oh, nothing ever went wrong.
Right.
Doesn't seem right either.
I think that's a great point. I mean, that doesn't always feel comfortable, right? To say, you know, looking back, I would have done this differently. I don't know if I handled it as well as I should have. I think as a hiring manager, it's okay to say that, and it does show that someone recognizes, has learned from, you know, something that they didn't handle as well as they wanted to. So I think it's It's a good question.
Just one more thing to add.
Yeah,
I mean,
go ahead.
One of my biggest, do not settle. Do not settle. I mean, you're so quick, you need to hire someone, there's a gap, everyone's working so hard, HR is pressuring you, we got to fill the role or we're going to take it away. I think the worst thing you could possibly do is settle.
Every position is like gold, right? Like it is like gold, so treat it that
Well,
way.
and Jeff, you said it too, is be open-minded. And I've hired people before who I was like, yeah, I'll interview them, but I don't think they're going to be right. And shame on me for that, because when you got to talk to them, again, they brought their resume to life. And I was like, I like this person. And I think they don't know anything about compliance, but you know what? You know, this person was in the military, they've done some really complex projects, and I think they've got the right skill set, you know, and it's been a success. So I think shame on me for being closed-minded, right? But I think it is know how to find something that might be a bit of a diamond in the rough as well. Because I think that, again, none of us started where we are today. Someone gave us a shot to take on new responsibility or jump into a role, and I think we owe it forward, you know?
Yeah.
And the question in the back, Dan.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I like that comment about having open minds, and I think sometimes we self-select for people like us. So one of the questions I had, which is something I struggle with, how to find and source people from diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, any tips or tricks or way you found success in finding people with different perspectives and different backgrounds and diversity of thought.
So the question was, how do you find diverse backgrounds, right? And I want to repeat it for the people online. You know, I think in part for me, it's how you write your job description. I think if you get too rigid with compliance experience, but if you write it in a way that you're open to alternative candidates with certain skill sets and backgrounds, that's a first step. And then I think it is, if you're working with your HR department, letting them know. I struggle with HR because they will see someone who comes from, there's a compliance on the resume, and they send it to me. I'm like, this person's just wrong skill set, right? And so I think you have to really coach up your HR team. But it does start with being open-minded in your job description and the qualifications. Because we've all looked at job descriptions, and based upon the requirements, it may not fit. We go, all right, I'm not even going to waste my time. You know, I think that's kind of a default. So I think it's having a broad description on your job, think first. But also is how you publicize what you're looking for internally and externally can help pull in. I mean, be specific, right? Look, I'll look for people outside of my industry who don't have compliance experience, right? I'll look for other type of unique skill sets, and it's publicizing that.
Well, that's why I think, too, we have to be really careful between this concept of, is this a good team fit, a good cultural fit? Because then we do tend to hire people who are like us, who make decisions like us. We went through an exercise a few years ago where we kind of did the yellow, red, green, blue communication style, and it occurred to me that people on my team who were there before I got there were different. Everyone I hired was the same as me, that we were all yellows, and I thought, oh, that's really bad. So I think the process that you use in hiring is really important, too. We always have multiple stakeholders from the compliance team at least, and then, you know, on occasion, folks from the business, obviously HR weighing in on, you know, what we think is positive. I learned so much from those conversations, and I sometimes have a certain mindset, something that I liked about the candidate, and someone will, you know, highlight to me that they spotted a red flag, or I didn't see something that was really positive. So I think, again, being open-minded, being willing to listen to the other individuals in the organization who have participated in the interview process, and, you know, making sure that you're taking all of that into consideration, because we all have different perspectives on candidates.
And I'll add one last thing to this conversation, then we'll move on to kind of a transition topic, if you will. And that's, I'm going to go back to, Amy, what you brought up, right? People prepare for interviews, and they'll have an idea of what kinds of questions you're going to ask. So it's important to not always take that first answer, but to really drill down in a friendly way, you know, in a friendly way, still making them feel comfortable. It's this concept that we've got listed up here, to drill and to mine, right? To really kind of dig in. Don't just settle for the surface answer, but if you're looking for specific skills, try and find examples of that and dig in a little bit. Okay, so what did you do then? Okay, so then after that, you know, what happened? Oh, so when you faced that challenge, talk about specifically what you did, right? Try and get these behavioral examples, not just kind of platitudes. So, you know, drill, mine, until you kind of get down to do I actually have an understanding of if this person has this competency, key competency that I'm looking for?
Can I add one more thing to that? Because I think even if they don't know the answer, it's not a bad thing when you ask a question like that. I think, I look at some of the people in compliance, and there are two business partners, two types of business partners, from my experience, right? One that always gives an answer on the spot. It's the go-to. Everyone knows I'm going to go to this person, I'm going to get an answer. 50% of the time it's right, 50% of the time it's wrong. Then you have the other compliance person that says, let me get back to you. Let me think about it. And I think that that's okay. And I think that it applies here exactly what Dan said. When you're looking at if they don't know the answer, it's okay, right? It might not necessarily be a bad thing.
Hey, Dan, back to the question, too,
Yep.
about finding diverse candidates. I think you always should be sourcing, even if you don't have a headcount that you're looking to fill. As you meet people within your org who, I was just talking to someone on my team at breakfast, and we were talking about someone in medical who kind of does the FMV for us. And I was like, man, she'd be great on our team, right? She's detail-oriented, she's really passionate about what she does, she's really good, right? And so I'm already thinking, okay, if I ever have a hire that we're going to do, let's keep this person in mind. But as you sit at these meetings, as you come across people, have a list of people who, man, they could be good one day to work with. Because you're already getting a leg up, too, and you're also doing it in a very informal capacity without the pressure of a job to fill, interviews. So you're naturally more open-minded to different backgrounds, different skill sets. And I think that's important too, is always have kind of a rolling list of networks and contacts of people who one day maybe you want to work with, because you never know. And I think that's just something I've tried to do.
And so there's one other element to add to this, and that's this idea of where is a person in their career and what sort of a kind of job level are you looking to hire for? How many people here would consider themselves to be pretty early in their compliance career? Just quick show of hands. How many are kind of middle, you've got experience, but you're not kind of CCO ready? How many are like, hey, I'm CCO ready? Okay. Don't be afraid to say that if you are. So, those expectations are going to change, depending on, exactly where is a person. So if you're hiring for somebody who's more middle as opposed to, early in their career, just getting into compliance, those expectations will change. So Jill's going to comment a bit on that and how those expectations might shift and change.
Yes, and
when you want me to go to the next slide, just let me know. That's going to serve you.
Okay, thank you. And maybe we can go ahead and go to the next slide. I guess the first thing I will say, and I've passed on great advice that was given to me in my career, which is we all own our career progression, right? That doesn't mean that you don't need help, you don't need supporters along the way, but I think being strategic about where you want to be and how you get there and leveraging your networks and leveraging opportunities sits with all of us. And that's something that I think is important to convey to individuals in our organizations so that they feel empowered, right, to think about what do I need to progress in my career. With that said, I think we all identify that there are these shifts that need to take place as we move through our careers. And it's not just about getting that technical expertise. It's not just about, okay, I've done investigations now, and now I've done, policies and training, so I'm moving up. There really are, if you look at those buckets of the foundational skills, these I guess, shifts that need to be made over time. And we've outlined some of them here. So moving from more of a tactical orientation to a strategic orientation. And I think that's something that can be frustrating for all of us and can be frustrating for individuals on our teams because, we say, oh, you need to be more strategic. I think as compliance professionals, and I've worked in big organizations and small, I've never been just strategic. I've never had the luxury of just sitting around saying, I'm just going to think about where to move the pieces. I think we're always doers as well. So it puts us in a little bit of a catch-22 because we're always going to be a little bit tactical. And so the question is, how do you start thinking more strategically about your role and how do you develop those skills? And we'll talk about later about how to develop those. Again, this concept from moving from actually doing things yourself to leading other people in doing them. And when I say leading people, it doesn't just mean managing individuals in your organization, but it's really important to be able to lead cross-functional teams, to be able to pull individuals from the organization together, organize information in a way that you can move toward decision making. And I think that's probably one of the areas where I see people developing in a really positive way, right? I see them kind of working within their function versus being able to reach out across the organization and, again, not just run a meeting, but actually move the needle and get things done. So the other area that I was thinking about is, from a communications perspective, the ability to convey information versus the ability to influence individuals. And I think that's a really important sort of switch that I see, folks kind of making. And again, I go back to that question that I asked during the interview process, and people saying, I have good relationships, but, are you able to convey information to a business stakeholder? And again, maybe it's good or bad news, maybe it's a project that you want to implement, versus are you able to move the business toward what you want to accomplish? And I think that comes back to one of the earlier skills we discussed about being solution-oriented and being flexible, because if I look back at my career just at the company I'm at now, that I've been at it 7 years, I don't know that I've proposed anything the first time around and gotten a yes, right? It's maybe. But it's, a lot of times we have to be able to kind of shift how we think about things. Again, the listening skills, being able to understand from the business why they are or are not on board with what you're proposing, and kind of going back to the drawing board and saying, okay, I'm going to change the way I'm communicating this. I'm going to kind of change the narrative and try again and try to get things accomplished. So those are just a few of the things that I've seen in terms of career migration, where your skills really need to sort of shift and increase.
Gentlemen, would you like to add something?
Gentlemen?
Yeah. I love that communication. I like that a lot, and just listening to you, because, it resonates. If you're going to do a presentation to the business, you're going to be it's going to be a 50-page slide deck. You're going to do it to the compliance committee, right, at a more executive level. You need to be able to convey that information more succinctly to the board. Can you get it down to one slide? Can you take the 50 slides and in one slide convey the same message? And I like that. I think that's a really really good point. The other thing that I would just add to it, at least in our area, I think years ago, and for smaller companies and startups, compliance folks are generalists, where you have the ability to work on a lot of different areas. But for some of the bigger companies, we become niche focused in sunshine reporting, monitoring and auditing, investigations. And I think from a career progression of development, it's getting that cross-functional experience to sort of see the big picture, to see how it all comes together. Interestingly, I worked at a company, it was the first company in the CIA that had a review of emails. And our monitoring and auditing team went through tens of thousands of emails. And it's very difficult in the absence of context to really understand some of the messages that were conveyed. So we'd bring the leadership team in once a week, and we'd literally go through these emails and scroll up. And what I noticed, if they had a question, as they're scrolling, wait, that's an issue. Wait, that's an issue. Wait, that's an issue. The auditing and monitoring team were following a protocol, and they were looking for certain things. But the more, as the experience grew, and you get that cross-functional experience within compliance, you know how to find things, you know how to see the bigger picture, you know how to understand how it all comes together. So for me, I think that's really important, getting that cross-functional big picture view.
I'll talk about development from the standpoint of developing a team, because I think as leaders too, that's a huge responsibility, is to develop the people on your team, and that doesn't mean the same development for everybody, right? And I think it really is an individual endeavor with everybody you've got on your team, and that requires you to know who they are, what their skill sets are, what they want to do. And also sometimes having that conversation with someone where there may be a disconnect with their ambition and their potential, because those aren't always the same thing, and we owe it to them as well. And I always think that mid-year review or end-of-the-year review, there should be no surprises. If there is someone surprised that you think they're not doing a good job, right, at the mid-year or end-of-the-year review, then you haven't done a good job as a manager, right? And so for me, it's a continuous thing every day. And getting to know the people and first assessing the current performance in the job they have. That's part of their development. Are they doing their job to the best of their ability, meeting expectations or above and beyond, right? And then it's getting to know people, well, what else do you want to do? Do you want to toggle from one technical area to another? Or do you want my job? And if saying you want my job, that's fine. Like, great. I want people who want my job because I'm not going to be anywhere forever, right? But people don't always know what it means to have my job, right? And the people who want it and are capable potentially of getting it and having it, they need to see what your job looks like. So there's an extra effort you have to put on for those people because not only is it giving them exposure, you know, we all say, well, this is something I've got to handle, right? And you go, I need to be in the room for that. And then you may cut out your team, but that doesn't help them because then they don't see how you talk, how you interact, the things you're talking about, Jill, right, of how do you influence. So there's the ability to let them shadow you. And I had that as a young lawyer with senior partners. That's how I realized I didn't want to be a partner in a law firm, was I got to see what they wanted to do every day. I was like, oh, I'm good. But I mean it when you have to give them exposure, and that takes a little more work to find the areas and times and moments for them. And then on the other hand, it's when they're not with you, kind of pulling that curtain back and having those conversations. Well, here's why I did this, and here's what we were talking about. Here's what I'm going to cover with the board this quarter, and here's why I'm going to bring it up. It really takes that effort of talking through things because they have to know your mindset. And again, our mindset's not the only one, right? We're not right in everything we do. But you owe it to them if you think they have unlimited potential to give them as much of the kind of the background information and the insights you have so that they can start to think about it. And then they may say, you know what, I don't want your job anymore. Like, and I've had people go, you know what, I'm good. I don't want to go. I like, whether it's pressure, travel, responsibility, the situations you have to be in. That's okay. Knowing where you want to stop in your career is also a good thing too, but it doesn't mean you give up on that person, right? But I think it's important to know those employees.
Yeah, I would say along with that, in the shadowing exercise, the other thing I would encourage folks to do is if you want to shadow other parts of the organization, I'm happy to help facilitate that. If you want to sit in on an MLR or this meeting, you know, I think those are perfectly acceptable requests. And the other thing that you reminded me of, Jake, is, you know, I don't know, generationally, I think things are different, but in my day, everyone thought of the career as linear, right? Like you got to move up, up, up. And I think we recognize that, you know, people might move sideways in their career. They might take different opportunities. I've also said there have been times in my career where I'm just tired. Like I don't want to take the next opportunity. Whether those were the right decisions at the time, I don't know. But, you know, I try to encourage folks on my team that, you know, just tell me what you're feeling right now. If you want sort of this steady state for a while, maybe things are happening personally, or, you know, there are other things in your life that you need to take care of right now. That's okay. That doesn't mean your career stops now. It just means maybe for the next year or two, you're happy in this role, or you don't want me pushing you to, go take the executive, you know, MBA program or whatever the next thing is. So again, I think that openness and dialogue and just knowing yourself, knowing kind of what you want, and then allowing, I guess, giving space to individuals that you're managing to do the same thing is important.
So just so you don't get nervous about this, I know you're probably looking, no, you're not looking at the clock, are you?
Oh, are we looking
No.
at the clock?
Good. We may not get to the case study, but this is a really nice transition into the next topic, right? When you think about kind of career stages and developing, you know, throughout a compliance officer's career, there are different, you know, practices that you can employ to help them develop as a compliance officer, or that you, if you're, you know, you're obviously responsible for yourself as well, that different things that you can ask for when it comes to being developed. So we've got sort of a laundry list, if you will, of different areas and different activities, different things you can involve people in, which actually we were kind of touching on here. Some that we felt were really worthwhile for more foundational types of skills, some for more functional type of skills, some for more focused. So if, you know, we'll kind of do sort of a quick round robin here, commenting on these, some of the areas that or approaches used to develop people. So let's start with you, Jake.
Yeah, and one thing that's not on here but should be presumed is anyone who wants to succeed and move up in an organization has to be business savvy. I think that's really important. So we've all talked about the compliance technical skills and being intangible skills for compliance jobs. You don't understand how your business works. You can't speak the language of your business people. The rest of it doesn't really matter, right? They have to view you as someone who gets the business, understands how it works. How do we make money, right? What are our activities that we're trying to protect? What's our compliance program focused on? So it's business acumen is, to me, an absolute foundational element as part of someone's development. And so some of their development can be, I need to go speak with our marketing people and understand how they build their brand plan, or talk to someone in finance of how do we go gross to net, and what are all the levers we pull, and why do we make so much money but our profit's so small. You have to know that no matter what job you have, and I think sometimes in our world it gets forgotten because we focus on all the other things that we do day to day.
I think for this question, experience is the most important. I mean, there are a lot of different things that you can do, the mentoring program, the shadowing program, sending someone to a conference, but until they actually experience it or to see it, I think it's from a development perspective, the most important. So finding those opportunities where you can give someone the experience, to Jake's point, I mean, if it's, or I think Jill said it's sitting in a PMRC meeting or sitting in it's not, giving them the material or letting them read about it, but any way that you can provide someone experience, I would think is brilliant.
And I would just add, I think as compliance professionals, we can't always do all of this coaching and development ourselves. I think being creative about when do we pull in outside resources, whether it's an executive coach, whether it's an educational training program, a 360 review process. I think offering those opportunities to folks on our team and as compliance professionals being willing to ask for those things if you think you need it. If someone came to me and said, hey, I'd really like to work on a coach to help me with being more strategic or improving my influence skills, I think those are fantastic ideas. So just don't be afraid to use outside resources.
So we have a few minutes left here. So I don't see any hands up, but there's some questions you'd like to ask while we have this great panel in front of us today. Yep. Amy?
I keep trying this kind of matrix approach where making the role is going to be a few members of the team, that different team members have partnerships with different business aspects. Somebody's more focused on sales and marketing, somebody's more access, somebody, including myself, probably more focused on the medical team, but then having kind of functional things happening at the same time. But I'm finding it a tricky balance of, when you're ready to put somebody in front of the business and giving them still also have to do the monitoring or still have to do transparency. So any suggestions on actually how you get people, when you have a small number of people, how you organize them?
So I'm happy to kind of take that. I think there's this misconception that sort of the plum compliance jobs are those business-facing roles. And I've been in bigger companies and even smaller ones where I feel like if folks are trying to get to that point and maybe viewing more of the operational, the functional roles as less than or not as sexy or cool. I think there are first of all of those jobs are really important, right? And I think there are opportunities to put those functional roles in front of the business. So if you're in a policy role, having your head of policy be the one to pull the business stakeholders together and get the input. If you're in a monitoring role, having that person conduct the readouts of the monitoring. I think there are opportunities to put them in front of the business if that's what they want. To Jake's earlier point, you may get in front of the business and you're getting all sorts of horrible questions and you're like, oh, this wasn't really for me. But I think there are opportunities, regardless of where you sit in the organization, to get folks out in front of the business and interacting.
Okay, maybe one more. I know we're pushing up against 8:50. Yeah.
I have a question, just do a comment, and maybe even a resource. I'm Rob Zielinski with Portugal Rights Manager, and one chief compliance officer, and one called me the patron saint of the unemployed. And the reason I say that is because I talk to hundreds of people in this industry every year, and I always know at any point in time somebody's looking for a job. I always know at some point in time somebody's hiring a job. So I'll talk to your vendors as well, because we're talking to a lot of people, and we have really broad look at the industry. I really can, people like us can really help you find talent that you may not find, and your HR people may not find. Because we're talking to a lot of people, and I've really placed dozens of compliance people over the years in jobs, and I didn't get paid for it, but that's okay. Because I have paid for things that didn't work. So, anyway, just
Good, that's a good thought.
Right. Okay, one more question here, and then, if you need to go, you can go. Go ahead.
Just to follow up with someone that doesn't have the best interest in what you just did. But, I think it's totally right. I think our event is such a resource for
Yeah.
helping people find. And then as a hiring manager, it's the first person I call.
Yeah.
Right, when I'm hiring someone, is how do you work with this person, what's been their experience, how are they managing, how do they engage? I think it's really good.
Well, with that, we will officially release you. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you, panel, for all the work you've done.